Dr. Frederick Golooba-Mutebi is an independent researcher and a consultant. He joins us now on the line from Kampala, the capital of Uganda. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, Dr. Golooba-Mutebi. Good to talk to you again. A significant day in the a significant day in the history of Uganda today.
Well, I wouldn't say so, because it's just a presidential election like any other we've had. The only difference being that this one has been a little more violent than all the previous ones in which President Museveni has contested. But otherwise, I don't think that there is anything particularly special about it.
That's quite incredible, isn't it, that it can be viewed in that way, because most people, when they go to the polls, they're thinking about a new life, a new beginning at times. And the way you're talking, it's almost as if nothing much is going to change.
Well, I wouldn't say that nothing much is going to change. There has been a groundswell of support for Bobi Wine's candidacy. And there is a significant amount of dissatisfaction and disillusionment with President Museveni, and he hasn't made it any better by unleashing the kind of violence he has unleashed against Bobi Wine. So a slogan that has been going around, used by mainly young people, saying we are getting rid of a dictator, for me speaks volumes about their expectations of change following the elections. But I've been here a bit longer than a lot of these young people, and I have followed all the elections in which President Museveni has contested, and I wouldn't take it as a foregone conclusion that even with the massive support that Bobi Wine has, that he's going to win. He may, who knows, but I wouldn't sit here and say that it's guaranteed. I think I would put my bet on President Museveni winning again, not because he's popular, but because of the massive advantages of incumbency that he enjoys, including the control that the government has over the National Electoral Commission.
An electoral commission that has hailed these elections, and I just wonder, given what we've been seeing in the lead up to these polls, the arrest of opposition figures, detention, harassment, shutting down the internet, can these elections be called free and fair?
No, certainly not. Certainly not. The process leading up to the elections has really been shabby and really shocking in many ways. As I said to you, so far we have all thought that the 2001 presidential election or campaign was the most violent until now. But the violence of this particular one has surpassed that of 2001 by far. And I think that, in a way, President Museveni may have miscalculated, because this violence has been targeting young people. These are people with parents. These are people with relatives. And I think that whoever thought that this was a good strategy might have miscalculated, because you beat up somebody's child, or you shoot somebody's child, or you incarcerate them. It does have ripple effects, because so many people get shocked at the sheer violence that has been meted out against young people in their early 20s, in their teens. I was speaking to a lady today, a lady in her 60s, who has children pretty much in the same age group. She has always voted for President Museveni. But she said, look, I have children of the same age. Today it is somebody else's child. Tomorrow it might be mine. And for that reason, I'm not going to vote for President Museveni. I'm going to vote for Bobi Wine. So I think that this may have effects that we are not foreseeing, but let's wait for the results and see. But so far, preliminary indications, and these are very, very preliminary, suggest that Bobi Wine has performed very well in some parts of the country, even outside his own region of Uganda or central region. So let's wait and see what happens.
He became president, he took power in 1986, that's 35 years ago. And given the average age of Ugandans, that means he's been in power longer than most people in Uganda have been alive. And interestingly, when he took power, he said the leaders in Africa overstay their welcome, and this lay at the heart of Africa's problems. And those were prophetic words back then, but words that he probably wasn't taking into account for himself at a future time.
Well, in recent times, he has changed that statement. As far as I remember it, and I wasn't a very young child when President Museveni came to power, I was an alert teenager. He did indeed say that one of the problems of Africa is leaders who stay in power for too long.
So where is the country then at this stage? You talk about this groundswell of discontent. Young people are, on average, the majority. And for them, Bobi Wine perhaps represents more than just a candidate, but perhaps a desire for something that's different.
Yeah, you made a point which was valid, which is that President Museveni has been in power longer than most Ugandans have been alive. And so these young people who do not remember the bad days that preceded his presidency do want change. And sometimes people want change just for the sake of wanting change. They want to see somebody occupying the presidency. And therefore, reminding them of the bad old days doesn't have the same effect as it would have, say, for their grandparents. So it's a gambit that has not worked with young people. And so what we see in terms of the groundswell of support for Bobi Wine is hardly surprising.
What will happen in the coming days? The president likely will win this election. Somebody actually said today that Bobi Wine will win the popular vote, but Yoweri Museveni will win the election. So assume he wins the election. This discontent isn't going to disappear overnight. What will we see in the coming days, coming years? Might we see protests as we saw in Malawi?
Sorry, Peter, there is some interference in the line. Somebody else is speaking in the line.
I was just saying that is there a possibility that with this discontent on the ground, young people wanting change, that if President Museveni does win this election, might there be some pushback in the form of protests?
I think that prospects for a Malawi-like protest are not very bright, and that would be prevented by the very massive deployment of the security forces, who are very heavily armed to the extent of even giving somebody the impression that Uganda is in a state of war. So because of the heavy deployment, protests are unlikely. But what will happen is that the anger that may cause will keep simmering beneath the surface, and who knows at what point it might explode. But immediate protests, I think that's unlikely.
And the international community, the East African community, African Union, probably will all endorse this election, which you have categorically stated was not free and fair.
Well, as you know, the election observers, one can almost always predict what they're going to say. They will say, look, the election was conducted in a peaceful environment and so on and so forth, but there were a few weaknesses here and there, which always amounts to endorsements with a bit of critique or criticism. So I don't expect them to say anything different. And one has also to bear in mind they usually arrive in a country long after the campaigns began, and therefore their views do not reflect observation of the entire electoral process. Their views are usually restricted to the one day when people are standing in queues and voting. So that has to be taken into account.
If there's one thing that we've learned from history is that to maintain the status quo sometimes, especially when your leadership is not as popular as it used to be, to maintain the status quo, more and more force needs to be applied over time. But this is unsustainable and something does eventually give. What might that be in Uganda? What form might that take if it is unsustainable and something does give eventually?
Well, there are two things one could say about that. One of them is that we get surprised that given the large turn-up at the polls, that Ugandans vote President Museveni out of power. And if they did so massively, I don't think that he could do anything about it. You may remember what happened in the Gambia when nobody expected President Yahya Jammeh to be voted out of office, but he was. And he conceded, then tried not to concede, but anyway, eventually he went. Secondly, the other way of looking at this is that President Museveni is not a young person. He's elderly. We don't think that he's going to be able to run again and again and again. So age may come in which case over the next 5 years he might eventually decide to step down. As you know, in Africa we tend to forget very quickly. He would step down and people would move on. And then whoever takes over might then try to reorient the country in a completely different direction from the one in which President Museveni has been driving it. So, but I don't think that there could be anything more drastic than that. I don't anticipate a Zimbabwe-like situation happening in Uganda because the context is very different.